Amanda Pullinger, and I run a global club for women who are in the finance industry. We're really excited to have you here today, and we hope that you enjoy the session. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Wessex, who is Global Ambassador of our Next Generation initiatives. Your Royal Highness.
Thank you, Amanda. Today marks the 25th anniversary of the International Day of the Girl Child. There are currently 1.1 billion young women under the age of 18 in the world, a whole generation that represents an opportunity to create a better future for the world through their leadership. As some of you know, for a number of years I have been championing the issues of gender equality, working towards creating opportunities for girls and women to have their voices heard and their ambitions met. I've had the privilege to meet with many organisations that are committed to advancing women's power and influence, and I'm especially proud to be Global Ambassador for 100 Women in Finance's Next Generation initiatives, including the newly created 100 Women Impact Collective. This collaborative global platform will advance women in the finance industry and in finance roles by creating awareness, building partnerships to provide business and STEM education, and serving as a connector between industry and career-ready young women. When this initiative launched in February at Buckingham Palace, we gathered for a celebration where I had the opportunity to meet young women participating in our pre-career programs. Rather a lot has changed since then, of course, and recently some of the teenage girls who attended the launch had the chance to meet via a Zoom call to share how they had been dealing with school and life during the pandemic. We are very fortunate that through technology we are able to reach a truly global audience and to provide vital connections and support to young women around the world and give them access to female role models who serve in finance roles. And that is what we hope to do with this series of interviews between teenage girls and women in finance careers. I would now like to turn the programme over to Chaitali Patel, Global Director of the 100 Women Impact Collective. Chaitali, over to you.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Hi, I'm Chaitali Patel, Global Director at the 100 Women in Finance, leading our pre-career initiative. We are bringing together a finance industry leader and an aspiring student to provide more insight into the career journey of women leaders in finance. Today, I'm delighted to facilitate a discussion between Kenzie Goodwin and Rosemary, Mariana Fascinotti and Sophie, and Nana Pafor in Asia. Let's hear from Kenzie and Rosemary first.
I'm Kenzie Goodwin. I am a partner at Fincelerate. Fincelerate is a fintech sales and business development firm. So we are essentially fintech sales accelerators. Our mission is to accelerate fintech engagement within financial markets. My background is that I was an equity trader at BlackRock for 20 years.
Great. My name is Rosemary, and I'm a senior in high school from New York. I am the founder of Females in Finance, which is an organization that aims to help girls gain financial literacy.
That's fantastic, Rosemary. I mean, it sounds great what you're doing for Females in Finance. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. So let's get right into this. So my first question is, when you were a teenager, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Okay, so I think it's going to be slightly unexpected, but it's probably important to be, very honest in these situations. So actually, when I was a teenager at school, I actually wanted to be a psychiatrist.
Wow.
And so it's a bit of a change, clearly, since those days. And the reason I wanted to be a psychiatrist, I think, is I was always quite fascinated by the inner workings of the mind, and the effect that relationships can have on each other, circumstances that can have, the circumstances, the impact of those. And but it just fascinated me, the inner workings of the mind, and becoming, and to be able to have that opportunity to understand it more. then when I was at a careers fair at school, so I was at an all-girls school, and we had, so clearly they encouraged more females to come in to present to us. And I did meet with a female psychiatrist, you know, who is a really impressive character. And so for me, she was a perfect role model. So I think, you know, that also helped seal the deal, as it were, back then when I was a teenager.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Probably a bit unexpected as well. So
Yeah. So my next question is, how did you get into your role today?
yes, so so good question. So I think when I realized that to be a psychiatrist, I had to do 5 years of medical school, and that sort of required a lot of the practical side of things, because obviously, you know, psychiatrists don't like the sight of blood, is always the saying. And that would have been true of me, but I would have had to have seen a lot of blood in order to become a psychiatrist. So I decided probably not for me. And I just thought basically about what I enjoyed, and I was going out meeting different people to understand what they did. And the city so we're talking about the 1990s now, the end of the 90s, so just before the turn of the millennium. And the city was such an exciting place, and it still is a really exciting place here in London, in the Square Mile, and obviously similarly Wall Street is as well. And it was just so energetic, and there were just so many people. There were so many people, and there was just so much energy, and everyone was so driven. They were motivated. Everyone looked extremely glamorous, and that's what attracted me basically to the city. And to actually get into that role, I realized that I didn't necessarily have to have a vocational degree, and probably what would be best is for me to just study something that I actually enjoyed. And so I enjoyed maths when I was at school, and so I just carried on. And the university that I chose was UCL, and that was a very city university, in that a lot of events that happened there were very closely connected to the city. And yes, and so during my summers whilst I was at university, I did some work experience in the city, which cemented that you know, that decision, as far as I was concerned, that that's what I wanted to do, and that's where I wanted to go. So I continued to meet with people that were older than me, that were at university, that had sort of left, you know, they'd graduated sort of the year before me, and they'd started, and I kept all those close connections just to understand really what it was about, because, you know, obviously finance is a really big place, and there's huge differences between roles, especially back then when roles were quite siloed. And yes, I mean, actually, I came in through the side door. Sorry, this is to answer your question. I came in through the side door, I would say. I didn't go for a graduate program, and I started working in a role at what was then, back then it was Merrill Lynch. I would say it was more of a clerical role, and I realized that that was probably not what I wanted to continue doing for much longer. And so internally, I was very fortunate in that a position came up in trading in what was then known as Merrill Lynch Investment Managers, because it was before, I mean, this is a long time ago, I appreciate, but it was before BlackRock bought Milim. And I applied for the role, and I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work there, and to learn from some yeah, really great people. So I
That's
think that kind of answers your question in a roundabout way, but yeah, I came in through the side door basically.
wow, that's awesome. Speaking of university, what did you study at university, and why did you choose the subjects that you studied?
Yeah, sure. So because I wasn't exactly sure of what I wanted to do when I graduated. That helped make the decision in a way. So I didn't have to do a vocational degree. And I studied maths because I thought, well, I quite enjoyed maths A level, which is you do A levels here in the UK before university, and I quite enjoyed it. In the reason I enjoyed it because I quite like that problem solving, and I quite like that instant, that sort of instant. That instant answer that you can get, you solve the problem and then the answer comes out, and I quite like that problem solving aspects, and I wanted to continue doing that, which is why I chose to study it at university. But actually when I got there, clearly there's a big difference here in the education system between A levels and degrees, in that there was a big jump, and the way we were taught maths at university was completely different to the way that we were taught when we were at school doing A levels. But nevertheless, I learned a lot more, and it probably made it a lot more interesting to sort of see the theory behind things as opposed to just the formulaic problem solving aspects of it. It's yes, so yeah, so I chose maths, and that's the reason. Yeah.
Cool. So I know you've had a lot of experience at BlackRock, but I was wondering, how did you transition from BlackRock to your role now at Fincellerate?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And it was, yeah, it's very interesting in that obviously what I'm doing now is clearly very different to what I'd been doing at BlackRock. And and in my previous role at BlackRock, I mean, I was there for so long. So to make that transition, I was a lot more intimidated by the thought of it than the reality of actually doing it. And so how did I transition? So I would say that what happened is a lot of the networks that I had built up over the years at BlackRock served me really well. So I had a lot of very deep, long relationships that I'd built up over many years, and a lot of trusted relationships as well. So that was that made the transition a lot easier. The other thing that I would say is, whilst my role at BlackRock was very different, but in trading, you are in order to do it well, you have to think in a very entrepreneurial way, and you have to be constantly connecting the dots, and you have to be constantly making sense of things with limited information sometimes, but still being able to draw conclusions, hopefully profitable conclusions, with that limited information. And so all those skills that I had picked up over the years, but not sort of really articulated it in quite that way to myself, that's what helped me make the transition to the fintech world. Because now where I am at Fincellerate, obviously a lot of those trusted relationships that I built up over many years have really come into play now, whilst we're introducing our clients to financial markets. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the fintech world is very, it's changing all the time, and we're meeting entrepreneurs who have been going for 2 or 3 years at sometimes, and then their businesses, they realize what where their business is going, and then they sort of decide to pivot. So suddenly everything changes in a really short period of time, and you've kind of got to make a decision as to whether we should back that whether we should invest our time in that person or not, based on sometimes fairly limited information. So So yes, and then the other thing that we have to do as well in the fintech world is constantly connect those dots. Well, you know, sometimes someone has a really great idea, but so did 10 other people 2 months beforehand. So, you know, you've got to constantly connect those dots and ensure that what you're being presented with actually makes really good business sense, and that it's worth us investing our time in supporting them.
Hmm. Right. And what do you like about your current role at Fincellerate?
Oh yes. So I think what I really enjoy is meeting. So the energy that you get from meeting some of the early stage fintech, some of the entrepreneurs. I mean that is that's amazing. And what I really admire as well when you meet some of these entrepreneurs when they're very much at that early stage is, you know, you hear them talking and then you see what they've actually done, and obviously the two don't necessarily match up. But I mean that's the amazing thing, is you sort of see in a very short space of time that they had these, you know, they come in and they see you and they haven't actually done anything, well, nothing significant, but yet they've got these really ambitious goals, and you think, gosh, well, how are they going to get there? And actually in a year and in 2 years you see them get much closer to those ambitious goals, which is and that's, you know, that's great to see, and I love that and I enjoy that. The other thing is you learn a lot in the fintech space, because where in my old role it was so busy in our specific area of equity capital markets, you were so busy in that role, you didn't necessarily have the opportunity to look outside of that role. And in fintech, you know, we have to go multi-asset. You learn a lot more about the technology side of things, whereas previously my role was less focused on appreciating and understanding the technology behind it. So I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly being sort of pushed out of my comfort zone, and I'm also meeting lots of different people and making more connections, and those connections that I'm making are you know, really fun, energetic people.
Yeah, that sounds great. So looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah. Yes. So I could spend a very long time answering that question. So, but yes, I would say that looking back at my younger self, I would tell myself to make more bold decisions. And I would tell myself to have more ambitious goals. You know, I'd learn from these entrepreneurs that I'm meeting now is have those ambitious goals, because if you had that crazy idea, you're more likely to achieve it than to not have that crazy idea, right? And always when I look back on decisions that I've made, it's always, if there were to be not a regret necessarily, but you know, when I'm looking back and thinking, gosh, how could I have done that better, it's always like, no, I should have done more. I should have done more. I should have gone to I should have made more connections. You know, I should have made that bigger connection. I should have gone sort of higher up. And it's even when it comes to things, you know, like negotiating a salary for or a bonus or something like that, you know, it was always like, no, I should have asked for more. Always that's the lesson that keeps resurfacing whenever I look back. And I would definitely tell my younger self, make more bold decisions and have more ambitious goals, even if they sound crazy at the time, but just stick with it, because you'll get there. But you know, you've obviously got to set the crazy goal in order for you to achieve it. And yes, so ambitious goals and bold decisions.
Yeah, that's definitely some really great advice. So now, how do you think the finance industry is making a difference?
Making a difference for females.
Hmm.
Yes. So for perspective, I would say that the finance industry has come a long way in making a difference for women. When I think back to when I first started, there were hardly any women on my team. There was one woman on my team, and I really appreciated having her there because I was very young, and obviously, you know, she was my role model back then, and I really appreciated having her. But then when I think in more recent times, I mean, half the team, you know, no, not half, a third of the team were female, and I mean, that's a big difference. I appreciate, you know, it took nearly 20 years, but 15 years to get there, but that did make a really big difference. So what they're doing to make that difference, I would say, is they are a lot more thoughtful and strategic about the culture that exists within the firms, and by that I mean the culture being more inclusive, so allowing for more flexibility in the work day, which obviously clearly suits working mothers who are obviously female, but it's also, but the important aspect of that is, because previously when that happened, it was always about, well, women, because they're the mothers, so, you know, they want to be at home and they want the flexibility, but it was also about, the inclusive culture that's happening now. And obviously there's been policy changes with parental leave as well, which has helped, but the culture within the firms is also about saying to fathers, no, you have flexibility as well. So it's not just something that, you know, the parenthood is actually motherhood and fatherhood. It's not just motherhood, you know. So that type of inclusive culture has been hugely important. That's a real game changer. But even in social events, the culture is a lot more inclusive as well, where the type of social event would appeal to everybody, as opposed to sort of more one gender over the other. And I think firms are certainly being a lot more strategic. They're also celebrating and championing women, and profiling them more within the financial industry, and that's making a big difference. When I was younger, I mean, there were very few role models that I could look up to, whereas I think now there's an enormous number of really impressive women. And also the networks, I mean, to talk about 100, you know, for the people like 100 Women in Finance, and having that network and having that presence within financial markets is making, that in itself is making an enormous difference. And you are able, sort of within that network, you as a woman, you feel you can reach out to everyone and they're supportive towards you, and just to know that you have that support from these networks is, yeah, makes a really big difference. And it's knowing that you have that support and that backing, that's what also helps you make more bold decisions and more you know, and to set more ambitious goals, because you feel you can achieve it more, and then you're also seeing people out there that are actually attaining those goals as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that seeing more female finance role models such as yourself and hearing their story is really inspiring for girls like me, aspiring, you know, female finance professionals. Thank you so much. That's all my questions. Really appreciate that you took the time to do this interview today.
Thank you very much for interviewing Rosemary. It was lovely to meet you, and yes, no, I'm keen to hear more about females in finance and what you guys are up to. It's very impressive to see you do that at such an early age.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Kenzie and Rosemary. Now to a discussion between Mariana and Sophie.
Hi,
Great.
I'm Sophie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Sophie. I'm 13 years old and I'm currently in 8th grade.
Sophie, it's great to be with you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mariana Fascinotti. I'm a managing director at the D.E. Shaw Group, a global investment management and technology firm today. Sophie, I know you've prepared a number of questions, so do you want to get right into this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor to interview you for National Girls' Day. So let's jump right in. The first question I have for you today is, when you were my age, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah. So, you know, my daughter, who's 7 years old, just asked me that question, but asked me what I wanted to be when I was 7. And I think the truth is, both when I was 7 and when I was your age, that I really didn't know what I wanted to do. But one thing I did think could make sense for me when I was your age was to become a diplomat. And I'll explain why that's the case. I was very fortunate to grow up in 3 different continents, attend international schools globally. I'm half Italian and I'm half Puerto Rican. I speak several languages. And I've always thought of belonging a little bit to a lot of different places. I also really like negotiating. I always have. Building an argument, hopefully a cogent one, and then bringing people on board to that argument, to that point of view. So I think as a young woman, I thought that diplomacy would be a good fit because it's obviously an international setting. It usually calls on being multilingual, and it is a lot about negotiating and building bridges. So I think I always thought it was a field that would allow me to do things that I was good at.
How did you turn to the world of finance, and what fascinated you about it?
Yeah, I came to finance in a bit of an experimental way, let's say. When I was a student at Harvard College in 1997, the dot-com bubble was in the process of inflating. Everyone on campus, lots of my classmates, all were working on tech startups, kind of on the side of their other studies. But by the spring of my junior year, that bubble burst. The venture capitalist community, which is the group of investors that usually provide monies and fund early stage tech startups, had pulled back in a big way. And the broader stock markets were no longer bringing new public listings of these tech startups into the markets. So I think the immense allure that my classmates and I felt about working in tech startups in the late 1990s kind of went away. Maybe only temporarily, but it did go away for a little bit. So after my junior year at Harvard, I spent the summer living in Hong Kong. And I went back to the, let's say, the old part of business and finance. I went to work for a large management consulting company to help them figure out how to expand trading ports in the Victoria Harbor. And then I worked for a global confectionery business where I ran taste tests in local schools around South China and Hong Kong to collect data about taste preferences that could then be used for statistical analysis and to help the company sort of eventually amend or change some of the products that they were selling in the market, or how to position the qualities of the candies that they were selling in the local markets. These were 2 very different opportunities, but they opened my eyes to business and finance in ways that my experimentation with tech startups in my early years of college really hadn't. These companies were looking to do very tangible and clear things in my mind. And what I realized through those experiences was that finance would actually be a really good career path for me, because it called on those skills that I talked about a minute ago: language skills, comfort being in different regions, working across borders, but also negotiating and learning how some really important parts of our economies work.
Yeah, That sounds amazing. And then how did you get from there into your current position?
Yeah, so it stayed a little bit experimental. When I went back to campus my senior year at Harvard, I applied to jobs in the finance industry, but specifically in investment banking roles, and investment banks and markets jobs were pretty different than what I had done even in my in the summer between my junior and senior year. But what I liked about, especially a capital markets role within an investment bank, was that they had research positions. And research is a role where you are really trained a lot at first. And I thought that was the place where I would learn the most, so I thought, well, let me go try this, and let me be in a seat where I'm going to learn a lot. And if I don't like it, I'll sort of figure out my next step. But what I prioritized the most was finding a role in an environment that would really enhance my training and prioritize learning for me.
Did you also find that working in the research department for so long experimenting there helped you with distressed investing, since you really need to know about the companies and really believe in them for them to succeed?
Yeah, so there's no question that the research job influenced what I do today as an investor. What I did originally actually wasn't distressed investing. When I first joined Lehman Brothers, which was the bank that I worked with first early in my career, was analyze how borrowers behaved in the face of different interest rate incentives or credit changes in their credit profile, basically their financial wherewithal. So what I mean by that is if borrowers' credit quality improved, would that borrower look to prepay their mortgage, maybe trade into a larger home or get a larger mortgage? Or in the face of a larger interest rate incentive, in other words, the ability to lower the cost of their mortgage, would a borrower, again, change the way that they were paying down their mortgage? So I wasn't in distressed. I'd seen the dot-com bubble burst in college, and then I was working in the mortgage market, which is a domestic product in the US. And then, of course, the mortgage market itself became a bubble with the housing bubble that inflated during the early 2000s. And so by 2007, that bubble burst. And of course, that ended in a very negative event. The global financial crisis really brought the global markets to its knees. And that's really what introduced me to the distressed market. So I kind of saw two very moments of market exuberance early on in my career. And because of what I did, because of what I learned in my mortgage research seat, I became a very valuable, kind of coincidentally, really, accidentally, a very valuable person for the distressed markets, because distressed investors needed to understand what all these mortgages that had collapsed in value in the securities in which they sat, they really needed to understand that product a lot better. And so I shifted into the distressed market from then on. And so I've been in the distressed market since 2007, but I didn't kind of lead with a desire to be in the distressed markets, although I have found it to be an incredibly interesting part of the markets. You brought up something interesting, which is, I think, important to mention, that in finance, knowing your investment products, knowing the companies that you're investing in, understanding their financials, their balance sheets, their income statements, these things are really important, and they're absolutely fundamental skills. But what I think has actually made me a better investor, or has contributed in unexpected ways, is actually living through these two moments of market exuberance and understanding how investors react during times of extreme market volatility. And so, when I started in finance, I really thought, well, I really need to know the nuts and bolts of you know, how to read a financial statement and how to value a security and all of those things. And that's still true for anybody entering finance today. But what's equally important, in my view, is actually studying fields that are less tangible, but have had a big impact, I think, in understanding market behavior. So today, fields like behavioral finance, game theory, psychology, understanding, investors' pension for optimism, and then extreme retrenchment in the face of volatility. Those are things that, they're not so much textbook stuff, but they make the job a lot more interesting, and are very important in the context of the distressed markets, because we're usually dealing with companies that are in significant trouble of some sort, in an environment or in a more macro environment that is also, significantly more volatile than performing markets.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a distressed investor and what distressed investing is?
Sure. So distressed investing comes in a bunch of different flavors, but the most common type of distressed investing is when you invest in a company, usually in its liabilities, so in its bonds, in its debt, bonds or loans, and you're usually buying them at a discount. And the reason you're buying them at a discount is because the company's come into trouble and it's unlikely to be able to repay its loans in full. So you buy them at a discount, and then you negotiate with the company to kind of resize its balance sheet. So either to roll a portion of the debt and give the company more time to emerge from its financial distress, or if the company and the management team are really unable to sort of fix the situation that they're in, then often you actually do something called a debt for equity swap, where as a bondholder, you actually end up owning the company and running it, trying to turn it around, and then usually selling it back into the markets as a performing business. So the distress strategy comes in a number of different flavors, in that some people just want to buy the debt at a discount and then are hoping for a market turnaround, and the investments they're making kind of appreciate in value just because the markets improve and the conditions that are creating stress for the company actually change. And the other flavor is this more sort of active investing, if you will, where you're actually taking over the company, running the company yourself, sometimes working with new management teams, maybe changing some of the strategy for the company and repositioning it so that it can become a performing business again, that's viable and can be sold into, again, the performing markets. What I do specifically is sort of a combination of those two things. Often we are buying very small loans to buying loans at a discount to very small businesses and working with them as much as we can actually outside of court, so what we call amicable or out of court resolutions, to reposition to reposition these companies in the markets. So this is a segment that is a little bit less trafficked than some of the larger corporate distressed markets, and is one of the reasons we like it. It's also a very important part of the market in Europe. I'm sitting here today talking to you from central London. I've been living in London for the last few years, and we spend a lot of time looking at the European markets, and that's a market that has the European market is an economy that has lots of small companies compared to the US, which tends to be a market that's composed of a lot of large corporations. And so even depending on which region you are, the distressed investing strategy can change a little bit because you're reacting to really sort of the economy and the makeup of the economy in which you're operating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. And you mentioned you invest in both equities and debt. Which do you find more volatile and which do you prefer of the two?
That's a good question. And the truth is that equity and debt, when it comes to distressed companies, are both very volatile. Often the equity, though, is not worth very much. As I was talking about before, your debt might actually become the new equity, the new owners of a company, especially if you're pursuing a strategy the debt for equity strategy that I was mentioning before. So, usually both can be very volatile, and because by definition we're talking about a distressed environment, the volatility can come from both the broader markets, right? Like, for example, this health pandemic has caused a lot of, especially in March and April, caused a lot of volatility in the markets broadly. But then it can also be very specific to the company, right? So, for example, a hotel today, is particularly affected, or an airline is particularly affected by COVID because people can't travel, less people are going on vacation, less people are willing to get on a plane. So that's creating very specific types of stress for companies in those industries, right? In the distressed markets, you're always operating under volatility. It can come from the broader market, or it can be very specific to the companies that you're looking at. But usually we are more focused on the debt because the equity is often worth nothing anymore by the time that we're looking at it.
Okay. And is there any investment or company that you're currently excited about?
Let's see. So we're less focused on like a specific company right now. A lot of what we're doing, given the environment that we're operating in, is trying to, distinguish the winners and the losers in the current state of the world, right? So I was talking about the industries that are very out of favor today, and we're looking for opportunities within some of those industries, specifically because they are out of favor, right? So the more out of favor they are, the more likely they are to be distressed, and the more likely that we are going to be taking a close look at them. The biggest question that we think about today when we look at opportunities is, yes, there's a very significant level of distress as a result of, the macro environment that we find ourselves in, but is the company, or is the opportunity, a viable opportunity? In other words, if you roll the clock forward 9, 12, 18 months, should there be, does that company or does that opportunity have a reason to turn itself around? Will things get better? And if the answer is no, then we're unlikely to look at it, no matter what it is, what company it is, or what industry it's in. If the company is, no, we think there's viability, there's just this moment of very significant stress, then we can get really excited about it.
And in this current pandemic, I've been currently have to go on online school again because we have a second wave rolling around. So do you think that many physical companies especially have enough cash flow or cash reserve to survive this and then come out? Or do you think it's an easy path to bankruptcy?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry you're back at home. First of all, I know it was pretty special to my kids to be able to go back to school in person in the last few weeks, and I'm hoping that they're able to continue to go in person. But for sure, we're also having a resurgence over here in London, so they might be back home with me very soon. But look, you raise a good point, right? This moment of distress, this pandemic has caused a lot of cash flow stress, right? People have their, companies have their rainy day fund, but this has been a pretty big storm for them, right? And so many of these companies are out of their savings. They are unable to operate in what, in the way that they were operating before. And a lot of government support, globally in lots of different markets, not just in the US, but in the UK and in different governments in different countries in Europe. The government support that's helped some of these companies sort of bridge some of the stress, that support is waning, it's diminishing, it's getting smaller. And so the impact, I don't think there's a single answer to your question. Some companies will weather this and some will not. And and new companies will also form as a result of the opportunity, right? So e-commerce is a really good example. So many people's spending habits have changed in the last 6 months because they were forced to change. So, if you read some of the financial press about this, things like the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times, you'll see people talking about how the digitalization of the economy has happened a lot more quickly than people had originally anticipated. So if young people like you are more willing to do a lot of your shopping online, now other generations are also being forced to do a lot more shopping online. Groceries, right? A lot of groceries have moved to online, to the online format compared to before. So some of those sectors have become winners of this environment, and that may not revert even after things improve and the pandemic is hopefully overcome, etc. Some habits may just be new habits that stay with us, right? And so unfortunately, there's not like one clear answer. I would definitely say that there are winners in this market. There's some big losers in this market. And if there's maybe like one common theme, it's that the smaller companies are the ones that are struggling the most.
Yeah, so you mentioned that a lot of them are going digital and they may stay that way even after this hits. So do you think there's a specific industry that you think won't be coming back and will stay on the digital side?
Well, I haven't spent that much time thinking about ones that are like completely going to disappear, won't come back. But I think the balance between how much of a digital business model a company has versus not is likely to have shifted permanently in the direction of more digital support. So, we talked about groceries. That's a good example. I think a lot of people that maybe were skeptical of doing their groceries online now kind of have done it for the last 6 months and might just have found it to be convenient, right? And so that is likely probably to stay. But again, I think it really depends on the companies, the regions, and the how quickly we go back to how quickly I guess we overcome the pandemic. Because the longer we stay in it as well, the longer those habits that have changed will be entrenched, and the more permanent some of the changes that companies have made. I'll give you one other example. So I've been working from home with all of my colleagues since March, as of many people, that worked in offices before. And I really miss going to the office, to be honest. And in the same way that you, I'm sure, missed not being in school and are now and are back home, while I think that we can do a lot of our job at home, most of our job we can do from home. We're well set up. We have computers, of course. Like we can do everything that more or less that we need. But what you really miss when you are not with people, what I imagine you miss from not being able to be in school with your classmates and your teachers, and what I miss about not being in person with my colleagues is those sort of less formal conversations that you can have, right? So when I'm talking about an investment opportunity with one of my colleagues, I was used to just literally turning around and saying, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this company? What do you think about this signal that we're seeing in the market? Is that interesting to us in any way? Is there something that we can, how should we respond to the market signal that we are seeing? And now that has to be a Zoom call and a scheduled Zoom call. And it just some of that informal, less, organized conversation doesn't happen as much. And, when you're negotiating a complex business restructuring, for example, looking at how to bring a company outside of a bankruptcy, those are hard things. You want your lawyers at the table with you. You want your financial analysts at the table with you, doing that through Zoom or any other platform like that is a little bit harder. And so if there's one thing I think, and I genuinely hope we can go back to, is a lot more of that in-person interaction, because there's a lot we can do on phone calls and through email and video conference calls, but there's a little bit that we can't. And I think that human interaction is important to bring back.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. We had 3 weeks of school, I think, back to normal, and it felt a lot better to be able to talk regularly without having to plan a Zoom call. So I think we're
Yeah.
coming a little bit up on time, and of course, many girls, including myself, are extremely inspired by you and what you do every day. So I have one last question for you, which is, advice would you give your younger self and girls like myself who are looking to make it in the finance world?
Sure. Well, like, first of all, thank you for your kind words. And what I would say to you and all your peers, and what I say to my daughter is, first of all, that think about finance as a career, because it's a really big world. The finance industry has a lot of different jobs in it, a lot of different sectors, industries, and a lot of different skill sets can come to bear in finance. So if you're a really analytical, quantitatively oriented person, there's tons of really interesting research and financial analysis jobs that you can do. If you are, really understand products and can explain them well and love to negotiate or love to, talk with people, sales and finance is a really interesting role. If you want to help companies solve complex problems, an advisory role within finance is an interesting job. And even even legal careers, there's some really interesting kind of financial specialties within the legal world that are interesting careers. So, I'd start by saying that finance can accommodate lots of skill sets, lots of interest, and can be a really rewarding both personally and more broadly as a job. And so I definitely at least encourage people to think about it. And then the second thing I would say to you is, don't feel like your first job in finance is your last job in finance, right? I started in two very quirky things. My early experiences in business were, how to make one of the largest, logistically complex trading harbors in the world more efficient. Of course, I was very junior and I was working with very seasoned and experienced professionals in untangling that problem, but it was a very, frankly, cool experience for me. I didn't necessarily have a ton to add at that stage, but it gave me a really good sense for how companies get advised, the types of questions that they might ask. Then I went and I worked and I literally ran taste tests in schools and then collected that data and helped the marketing department of a multinational confectionery business figure out how to market that product in a more interesting way. And then I went to the mortgage world, and now I'm a distressed debt investor, right? So, you couldn't paint a straight line across those things, right? They are just a collection of experiences that I had, and but each one actually helped me from one to the next. And so, as I said earlier, I think starting with considering a job in finance, knowing that there's so many different roles in it, is really important. And the second thing is prize a role early on in your career that will prioritize training you. Get a job in finance if you want to try finance that will ask you to think every day instead of getting, A, B, and C completed every day. So in some ways, be less of a doer and more of a thinker early on in your job in finance, because it's that kind of product knowledge and the approach to solving financial questions and problems that will really help you tackle, bigger roles, bigger questions, more complicated situations in your job. And, that's how you connect future career opportunities one from the next, as opposed to, kind of getting your ideal job day one, which, I think is hard to identify day one, because even though you might have skills that you think are relevant for something, and it's important to try to align those things, you might not be in the exact environment that you want to be, or in the exact product, or in the exact region that you want to be in. But so just knowing that world is so big and that you're just taking your first early steps, making sure that those steps are giving you a lot of training and grounding, and and knowledge on how to tackle financial problems will be really rewarding to you in the long term.
Thank you so much for that. It was an honor interviewing you today and speaking with you. I loved hearing your story, and thank you for inspiring me. And happy National Girls Day.
Thank you. Happy National Girls Day, and it was a real pleasure to meet you, Sophie.
Thank you both, Mariana and Sophie, for your time. That was wonderful, very insightful. Now let's hear a conversation between Nana and Asia.
I'm Nana Before, and I work as a multi-asset investments business associate at Wellington Management.
Hello, I'm Asia Bush, and I'm currently a student at UCCI. I'm part of Girl Force. So it's very nice to have you here today. Your career is a very inspiration for me. You know, I'm studying to be a lawyer. So the first question that I have for you is, when you were a teenager, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Sure thing. So if I think about Nana at 16 and what I wanted to be, completely candid, I had no clue what I wanted to do. But I had a very strong conviction about the subjects that I enjoyed, and those subjects were maths and the sciences. I'll delve a bit into why I enjoyed them so much. With maths, I found it very logical and very structured, and that spoke to a particular part of my mind. And with the sciences, I really enjoyed chemistry and physics because I thought that they allowed me to kind of use these theoretical concepts and explain the world around me and make it very applicable. So those were the two subjects that I really gravitated towards. If I think about going back to Nana at 16 and what career she wanted to do, I don't know, but I would say that there were three things that I was kind of looking for. The first being something numerical, the second being something logical, and then the last thing being something that allowed me to think about the world around me to a greater extent.
Yeah, I definitely like that because, I mean, right now I finally get into university. Down here, the whole school system is different. So like in high school, I had that choice of, you know, at first I wanted to be a vet.
Oh, wow.
And then it was, you know, so it's just like a completely different thing now. But I love sciences. Math is, you know, it's a love and a hate thing for me, but I love like the English, philosophy, psychology. So, you know, it is good. I like that method because it's very easy when you know your subjects that you like and then just kind of link them to a career path you want to be in.
Exactly.
So my other question for you, Anna, is how did you get into your role?
So practically speaking, how I got into my role. So in my penultimate / final year of university, I studied an integrated master's in chemistry. And in my final to second to last year, I really focused on wanting to go into finance because that's the area that I enjoyed through experiences. Practically how I got into my role was I applied for a traineeship at my firm. So it's essentially a 12-month experience, and that was to sit within the multi-asset investments team, which is the team that I'm currently with now as a business associate. So yeah, that's how I practically got into my role.
Yeah, that's super cool. Here I have done like a lot of internships here, and I find that those are really helpful to like have connections with. I mean, I've done internships with even construction, something that I don't see myself working in the field, but you know, it's just being Cayman so small, it's really nice to have a good connection with people because you may find your dream job amongst doing that.
Exactly.
So in the midst of like, you know, getting onto this role and everything that you're doing now, what do you like about it?
What do I like about it? So I would say there are multiple things I like about it, to be honest. But if I could pinpoint it down to 3 points, the first would be the breadth of experience. I work in multi-asset, as I mentioned. So that means that I get a high level overview into multiple types of strategies. And what that means for me is like a lot of exposure in the earlier part of my career. So that's one thing I like about it. The second thing that I like about it is it kind of allows me to use multiple pieces or sides of my personality. And if I speak to specifically, this may be going too much into detail, but the team that I'm on is like sits in between the investment sides of the business and then the client side of the business. So what that means is that for me, I get to see from start to end how all the various teams kind of think about putting forward an investment approach. So that's what I really appreciate. That's the second thing. And then the last thing is going to be cheesy, but it's practically just my team. I enjoy my team. So I work with a specialist and a director that are very open to essentially hearing my thoughts. They consider me a thought partner. And I think if I think about like my other friends who work across the industry, that's not necessarily true for their positions. So I'm just really grateful to work in a team that is willing to hear me out.
Yeah, just like I said, like because down here, there's a lot of like working opportunities, like I said, internship. And the last point that you made is like something really important, like something that at the age of 17, I decided to read is like, it's the environment, you know, because you can love your job, but if the environment doesn't like catch you.
Exactly.
I mean, done internship in a law firm. And then the environment for me was like, it wasn't really me, but I loved the work that I was doing, but it's just, you know, it's really the team. So another question that I have for you is, I mean, I could take a lot of notes right now because, you know, I'm doing university, but why did you study at university and what subjects did you do?
Okay, so I'm not too sure how it is in the Caymans, but we specialize from quite early on. So I know that in the US, you can vary your modules by like minor and majors, but in the UK, it's basically you choose and you go along that path. So I studied chemistry, and I think I spoke to this in the first question, but speaking to essentially something that interested me, it was very logical, and it meant that I could learn theoretical concepts that apply to the world around me. But then also from like a personal perspective, thinking about just like the way in which I wanted to leave the world. In my penultimate and final years, I really focused on sustainable technologies. So I did a project on like lithium-ion batteries. I did another one on predicting solar cells. And for me, being able to work in that type of, or contribute to work in that green space meant that I was contributing to something that was larger and outside of me. Hopefully that makes sense, but yeah, that's why I decided to go into chemistry.
Yeah, and like, cause like for me personally, this is my first semester in college, and it's like they tell you it's gonna be like, I mean, they do say college is college, but yeah, it's a lot of self management. That, you know, it's nothing compared to like any schools that I've been to where if I don't do my homework, you know, it's like, you know, someone behind my back. It's like me, and it's like the subjects that I took. I'm doing philosophy and psychology, and I love those because it just connects everything together. Yes. And I think when you do subjects, because even chemistry, I remember I did a little bit of it, and it just connects a lot, you know, like the sciences. So that's pretty cool. So which subjects do you do at like all of them at university?
So I did an integrated master's in straight chemistry, but inside that you have varying modules. So it could be inorganic chemistry. So inorganic chemistry, I'm going into way too much detail, but inorganic chemistry being like solid materials type stuff. Organic chemistry, which is like mixing together organic chemicals to try and output like synthetic products, or the last thing being physical chemistry. So I specialized on a mix of inorganic chemistry and physical chemistry, and I did a computational chemistry master's with that. Really enjoyed it because it allowed me to focus in on that green area that I mentioned before. But yeah, that was kind of me. And speaking to your point as to the self-management and to the discipline, I think when you do something you enjoy, it kind of motivates you beyond, okay, I'm going to get a grade A. It's more so, I'm doing this, but there's a purpose that I feel connected to and behind it. So yeah, completely resonate with what you were saying there.
Definitely. So my next question is to you is like, what advice would you give your younger self about careers?
Ooh, what advice would I give to my younger self about careers? If I was to give my younger self advice about careers, I would give myself two pieces of advice. The first goes without saying, but it is be good at your day job, perform well, show up well, have a great attitude. And I say that because I think a lot of people come up with these grand tasks and grand goals of, oh, in 5 years, I want to make like a managing director or something like that. But it's really in the day-to-day that you make those small differences and changes that create that long-term 5-year plan of being a managing director. So I would say in the day-to-day, perform well. The second thing would be Second thing would be lean into mentorship from an earlier onset. And I say this because I like coming into the corporate world, you can kind of feel like you need to bring this professional version of yourself that is very separate to the personal version of yourself. And what a mentor does is they kind of challenge and sharpen you to like bring those two things together to make you think about your career in a very holistic manner. So I would say lean into mentorship way earlier on in my career.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because I feel just like that as I work and I go to school. What I would say to myself, because it's like before I would picture this life, they always ask the question, 5 years, where do you see yourself? And it's cool, but I have this very belief of limiting myself where I could go, you know? So I feel like with my career, it's like everyone has the mindset where like you stay on one job for the rest of your life, when really some opportunities that you may find is not going to take you to, like, let's say be a lawyer, but it's like I don't know, some type of job that builds you to get there. And that's careers, you know, like you swap and you get there. So at a very young age, I've learned that by myself, just putting myself out there. And I'm just like, you know what, you don't have to settle in one job to feel stability or retirement. It's just like take risk and move flexible, you know?
Be dynamic is what you're saying.
Yeah,
amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah. But if there's any piece of advice that I would also say to like a college student, definitely lean into your university experience. Yes, internships. Yes, doing all the extracurricular activities, but like lean into the people, because you're interacting with people that you perhaps would have not even met if you hadn't have gone to university. So yeah, university was a good time for me. It completely changed my mindset as well.
Yeah, that advice just rang bells, because I mean, down here it's small, you know, it's an island, it's pretty small, but I could still get my degree up there. I definitely think London, I went in February, and looking at it, it's like a really nice environment. Like I just love it. And it's like, even the weather, I mean, the weather is completely different. Down here is hot, you know.
Yeah, I imagine it's much nicer down with you.
Yeah, but I mean, up there, like, I just feel like I should definitely get that exposure to like university. I think that's the part, because I mean, when it comes to the work and stuff, I could get that here, but that exposure to the diversity, because when you go into like workplace, even here, you will see a lot of people from different countries, you know, and you just never know. The people in college, I'm sure you probably seen them somewhere, like just walking random, you're like, you know, like, hey.
Exactly.
That's super cool to do.
Oh, yeah.
My interest is the University of Kent. I was looking at that one.
Oh, wow.
I mean, London has so much universities, just like so much options, but that one, like I was looking at it, I was like, yeah, that stands out to me.
You could always do a master's. You could honestly, you could always do a master's or like a post qualification, because LLB, you'll be doing perhaps the LPC at some point.
Yeah, right now I'm just doing my associates here, because down here, like the school system is different. We do have a law school,
right?
And then you could do like, you know, the bar exam down in London. So it's just like certain things like that. But I'm pretty excited for university. I just feel like, you know,
I'm excited.
It's a different thing.
Nice.
Thank you, Nana and Asia, for your time. This has been a wonderful session. Thank you all for your time.